Do you want to start that way? I'll do again. All right. I've got Jill in the studio today, and Jill had some things on her mind. So, Jill, what do you want to talk about today? What are we talking about?
Oh, thanks for having me back on, Andrew. We've been meaning to do some shorts for a while. And shorts, I mean under 30 minutes podcasts with just you and me chatting about stuff that comes up fairly regularly. Today we are talking about injury and recovery, particularly talking about the confidence and the stories that we tell ourselves about what our bodies can and can't do, especially after an injury or a long-term break from movement. And we'll be exploring how confidence can be rebuilt through our environments, through opportunities and invitations to move again. And even if you've had a bad injury, your body is capable of adaptation over time, given the right stimulus. And I think the main message coming out of this, we'll finish on some takeaways, but that recovery, or as we're getting older, it's not about having your old body back. It's about building a new relationship with the body that you have now and kind of finding what's possible and how capable you are. So that's what
All right.
I'd like to talk about today.
Yeah, I think that's a good conversation. We might not get it all in 30 minutes, but I think we can chat about it a little bit. And why is this on your mind? Have you had any kind of conversations recently, or interactions, or anything that has got you thinking about this?
I think on the back of the Strong for Life course, which is on building bone density and quality, and I guess because we get to spend so long with people, because it's 10 weeks, it was really interesting to hear the stories that people had at the beginning, kind of embedded assumptions around their capabilities. And then that comes up often in classes as well, in that people will come and say, well, I can't do this anymore, or, I've got this injury, so that means that's off the table. And often it's not kind of as black and white as that. Um, and there are other ways to maybe fulfill that movement or that movement goal. And I think it just is a recurring theme. And I think a lot of us, and I feel like I do it as well, can kind of get stuck in these kind of belief cycles about what our capabilities are. I was just thinking, not related to movement. And also, yes, I do want to talk about my knitting. But as a child, I was taught to knit, but because I'm lefty, everybody would always caveat the lesson with, this is very, very difficult because you're left-handed, and actually this is actually beyond I don't think I can do this. It's much harder because you're left-handed. And so it's just assumed that was the rule. And then age 42, realized that I could probably just teach myself to knit like a right-hander, and actually it's fine. I can do that. And as you'll see,
Yeah.
there it is. So
Yeah,
that
ta-da!
is
There it
how
is. There's the
I
new
brought
snood.
knitting into the conversation.
Well done. Way to weave it in to the conversation.
Thank you. Let's see if you can weave felting in.
No, that's okay. I don't need to talk about my felting. But yeah, it is interesting, because the lesson on that is, it's usually okay. It's fine. It goes back to the conversation we always have about, things being optimal or things being perfect, or just sort of getting on with it and learning as you go. And I think so often this barrier of like, well, this is going to be difficult. It's going to be impossible. I don't have the capabilities to do it. And the hardest thing to do is sometimes just to start and just to get on with it, whether it's a movement practice or strength training or going outside or just going on a walk. I think a lot of times people, and sometimes rightfully so, they think about all the barriers, they think about all the things that are preventing them from engaging in an activity. When in fact, if you can just kind of step out the door and start doing it, it's usually not as complicated as it needs to be. Or even if it is difficult at first, you're going to learn so much in the process of learning, the process of being a beginner at something. You can just make this great progress right away. And that's one of the things I always think about is when we're working with new populations or new people, kind of the stories or the fears that people have.
It might be useful to start with talking about that kind of fear avoidance cycle, just as a kind of beginning point, because I think a lot of us, that will resonate with a lot of us from different parts of our lives, because we don't lose the confidence overnight. We lose it through all the tiny little kind of, oh, I better not do that. And then we kind of, that builds over
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. So it's interesting, because there's a lot of different branches of studying behavior and pain and capability, and a lot of these different branches have kind of mapped out these similar patterns, these cycles, often these self-limiting cycles So it could be the pain avoidance cycle, fear avoidance cycle, fear of falling cycle, all these different cycles. And you just kind of imagine a wheel, and it could be any kind of behavior. I'll use pain avoidance cycle as an example, which is that if you're someone and you've hurt your back, and it could just be just a random thing. Maybe you were just stressed out one day and your body was hypersensitive and you just moved in a certain way that one of your nerves kind of freaked out. It sent a ping into your system. And that fear of pain, all of a sudden people will develop new movement restrictions based on that. So let's say they were bending over to tie their shoe, they experienced some pain, maybe their back felt really bad for a day or two, so they're really afraid of it. All of a sudden they might stop bending over or engaging in any kind of behavior that is sort of similar to whatever set them off the first time. And then all of a sudden, you'll see that people will really guard their movement, and they'll really try to avoid certain movement positions. And because they start to avoid those movement positions, all of a sudden, they're not getting the stimulus they need. So maybe their muscles start to degrade in their lower back, or their body just becomes hypersensitive due to lack of stimulus. And that makes it much more likely that they are going to hurt themselves in the future because they're not giving their body the stimulus that it needs to kind of constantly recalibrate. Capabilities are dynamic. It's a sort of conversation between yourself, your body, and the world around you. And as people stop giving themselves that stimulus, then their chances of their body freaking out or hurting themselves, or sensing pain or fear becomes much greater. So, sort of counterintuitively, if you've hurt your back, one of the things you need to do right away once your body calms down a little bit is you need to make sure that you sort of drip feed it some positive stimulus. You need to give it different kinds of small stresses, just so your body can begin that process of building back up again, but then also reducing that fear. If you hurt your back once and you say, that's it, I'm never going to use my lower back again, then your world becomes really, really small. And all of a sudden, you lose all these capabilities. And that same pattern happens in all kinds of things. It happens in social situations. The less we socialize, the harder it becomes to socialize. So you get to this point where certain anxieties, rather than feeding them, you sort of have to challenge them. And it's the same thing in the fear of falling cycle. People get a big fall, they stop engaging activities where they might fall. They stop giving their body the stimulus. So, whether it's challenging their balance or their musculature, or getting the kind of impact that they need in order to maintain healthy bones. And that means next time they fall, they're going to be much more susceptible to a severe fall. So that's one of the biggest things right away, is that people will avoid things that feel like they're going to be challenging or scary or uncomfortable. But in doing that, they're going to reduce their capacity if they are challenged in the future. So that's one of the biggest things we have to do, just get people going out and doing things.
But I think that starts really young. Because I'm just thinking about one of the kids in our kids' social circle. You're often you're not held back by what your body can't do. It's more about the little stories that we've learned to tell
Mm,
ourselves of what is and what isn't for us anymore. And that can start really young. So, if you're like, oh, well, monkey bars are not really my thing. I mean, sure, for a lot of adults, that's probably true. So they don't really have access to monkey bars, but monkey bars are like a big, very central point of our children's lives at the moment. And I think you can start telling yourself stories from really when you're very young. If you struggle with something and then you think, oh, it's really embarrassing that I can't do it, so I'm not going to do it. And then it's that thing in school where it's very important, whether you're good at football or good at netball or whatever, and then you're the sporty kid, and then you're not the sporty, but that's the kind of the opposite, is that you're not a sporty kid. And then suddenly you just think, actually, I find all of this really difficult, so I'm just going to check out. And that can last all the way into your adulthood. Speaking as someone that was not the sporty kid and that kind of checked out pretty early from that, you can see, I just think we kind of convince ourselves of these things that are completely true, and that sometimes actually we need to go back and revisit them. I'm sort of going all over the place, as I always do,
no,
but I'm going
no,
to go
that's
to
okay. Yeah, no, but
back pain
that's
for a little
that's fine.
bit.
I mean, just to jump on that, these stories, yeah, they have these big downstream, these ripple effects where you can decide, okay, well, I don't like dancing, or I don't like this, and then the next thing you know, you spend 20 years not dancing, and then maybe one day you find out that actually it's not so bad. I think of there's this axis of like, imagine this sort of Cartesian plane of challenge versus support. And one of the big they often talk about, well, people can do well in high challenge, high support environments, but that means you need to provide an environment where not getting something right away, you don't want it to feel like failure. You don't want you want to give people this opportunity to try things and stretch and have these stretch goals, but if they don't get it right away, you need some kind of structure so it's okay, or they have other options, or they have room to explore. I think a lot of times with people, like, for example, in PE, sometimes they're put in these challenging situations, everybody's watching them, and then they have a sense, oh, I failed at that. Like, I didn't get it my first try, so I must be crap at it. Where I think of, I see this in our own kids, one of our kids, if they find something difficult, we need to almost create this environment where they feel like it's okay for them to go and practice and kind of learn at a different rate from their brother, and then get to the point where they are confident enough so they can sort of engage. You almost need the confidence to play. And I know it's one of the things we've seen a lot as well, this idea of having the confidence to be a little bit competitive. A lot of times people will come to class and say, oh, I'm not really competitive, and the first 6 months they're not, and then they get good at stuff, and all of a sudden they do feel sort of comfortable playing around with things. I think that's really important.
Can I go back to the stories of now? I do want to go back to back pain, but I am going to stay on the stories. Um,
Sure.
and as an adult, it's just when you're a child, there can be really influential people in your childhood that can tell you something that you take as gospel, and then you don't question for until you become much older and realize that perhaps that wasn't a very useful comment. Um, but there's also that, and then I guess it would be good to talk about sort of healthcare professionals and well-meaning comments from friends and family as well that can really shrink your world without you even really noticing it. And I was thinking in class the other day, we were running one of our nature moves classes, and most of the people in that class are in their 70s. And as we were clearing up the boards and things that we've been using for the class, one of the younger members, who is in her 60s, said to one of the older members, "Oh, you shouldn't be doing that." Whereas actually she spent the entire class doing that, and it had not been questioned at all. But because we were now in clear up mode and out of class mode, it was just quite funny. To which she was told, I've just spent the last hour doing this. I think I'll be fine." But we all fall into that. I feel it with my parents as well. I obviously want to be helpful. We live really close to them. But at the same time, if you move from a house with stairs to a house with bungalows, to a bungalow rather, you lose those movement opportunities. But I'm just thinking about all of those comments, and then the people that we know in classes or in one of our franchises. Her mum had a double knee op, or maybe it was just a knee replacement, but was told to not use her knees anymore, I think in case they wore out or something like that. And it was just like a comment for an outpatient that was said, possibly in passing. I'm not sure. We've got a blog on it and I'll put a post in it. But that one comment completely transformed the trajectory of the next, I don't know how many years it's been since her. But it just meant that she kind of stopped using her knees, and then her world sort of shrank quite quickly. And it wasn't until Lynn started running more classes to get her mum involved that she really, managed to rebuild that, and rebuilt it quite quickly in a supportive environment. But it is kind of terrifying that you can just say one thing as a person with power in that situation, whether it's a medical
Yeah.
professional or a member of the family
Well,
or something.
I think that 15 minutes in now, we want to keep this under 30. I think that maybe we should just make a decision to make this episode about empowering and disempowering narratives, and then maybe we can for the next one. Yeah, because I think this is important to talk about. We might as well give it time, because that is not a unique situation. I think that both of us could right now think of 10 examples off the top of our head of people who've been working with some sort of professional or someone they respect, who, inadvertently and with oftentimes good intention, have created these disempowering or these self-limiting narratives. So we think about another member in one of our Nature Moves groups who was running into the surgery, to the clinic to meet with her GP, and she was out of breath. And he said, "Well, what are you doing?" She's like, "Oh, I had to run in." And he's like, "Well, you shouldn't run at your age." So we always hear, "You shouldn't run at your age. You shouldn't carry heavy things at your age." I know you had an experience recently. The GP, they said, "Well, you shouldn't be picking up heavy things anymore."
Yeah. Well, I could talk about it because
So
I
I
had
think,
a hernia
yeah,
from
yeah.
giving
Let's
from
do the
giving
story.
birth. and it's been bothering me for a few years. And I was given no support. I have still been given no support on this, because I think it's kind of, I feel like our GP is really great, but also completely overworked and under-resourced. And she just doesn't have the capacity to do anything about it. And so very kindly just said, well, you just need to not lift anything heavy. Okay, obviously not the answer.
I think that's a good caveat to say right now is, we're going to say some things as we talk about this, and I don't want to be dismissive of GPs or the medical system because, both of us, we've been helped so often. We have so many people in our lives, who've been really helped by NHS or professionals. So it's easy when one starts talking about things like this. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and be dismissive of professionals who are often really lovely, hardworking people. But it's like you said, a lot of times the system now feels like it's stretched so thin that a lot of surgeries, a lot of GPs don't have the time or capacity to talk about these things, or sometimes the training. And this is why I wanted to also get in this idea of seeing like a system, where it's an idea I pulled from James Scott, of seeing like a state. But from the perspective of a GP, a lot of times they only have 5 or 6 minutes to talk to an individual patient. A lot of times they see back-to-back patients the entire day, except for their lunch break. So they're seeing people come in. They need to assess what's wrong with the person, but they also need to think about the limited resources of the medical system. And they need to think about, well, we need to ensure that we need to reduce whatever, somebody breaking a wrist, or we need to reduce the chances of somebody having an acute injury from falling or picking up something heavy. So from their point of view, it looks like reducing the number of times a patient comes in, reducing the patient hours per individual. So for them, having an overabundance of caution, saying, don't do this, don't do that, don't engage with that, don't want you to hurt yourself. From a systemic perspective, that looks like a success, because it could be that you have fewer people coming in who said, oh, I was running and I tripped and I hurt my wrist or something. The trouble is we don't really have stats. You can't produce stats on the inverse of that situation. So what I mean is, for all the thousands of people who've been told not to pick up heavy things, not to run, not to engage in physical activity, that might look like a short-term success, because statistically maybe you reduced the incident rates of small injuries, but that also means that people aren't outside moving, using their bodies, exercising, building up their bone density. So that could look like downstream 10 years from now, increased rates of osteoporosis, increased rates of people falling due to lack of balance, osteopenia, but also sarcopenia, dynapenia, all these conditions that we see that are related to aging, but are also related to inactivity. So, a lot of times this well-meaning advice can be actually increasing the load on the system, because we're not getting any sort of preventative advantage through physical activity. That's one thing. The other thing that's on my mind, because I came back from Spark conference, I was there a few weeks ago, where they're talking about physical activity, and there's been a real increase in research over the concept of care and helping people, and how in a lot of cultures, there are all these sort of beliefs, like if a woman is pregnant, she shouldn't move at all. If she's just had children, she shouldn't move at all. Once somebody is old, they shouldn't move at all. All these sorts of ideas that are really well-meaning, but are ultimately disabling. So there are all these different concepts. They talk about this idea of disabling professions, or this idea of de-skilling, or all these other ideas. Atomization is an example, alienation, but pretty much all these ideas of the system, often will create this environment where people become disconnected from their own body, or their needs of their own body, their own capabilities. And that's not because people are trying to be bad. It's just because sometimes that's how it works. People aren't given the opportunities to understand their body, and quite often they lose the agency, and it's so easy to defer to somebody else to tell you what to do.
Okay, seamless edit, because it's actually tomorrow morning now, which is why we're so bright and young looking in the video. And I've got a lovely coffee. Anyway, I think now is a good time to talk about nocebo effect. And if you're not familiar with that, we can kind of go into that. It's something that we touch on our in-person course. And it is a very good, I was going to say it's like a good sort of framing to think about how you interact with health professionals. I find it quite useful. Let's go. Andrew, what is nocebo?
Sure. So nocebo effect, as the name kind of suggests, is pretty much the opposite of the placebo effect. So placebo effect is essentially if you just believe something is good or something is going to work or confer some kind of advantage, it will. If a kid thinks if they put some fire stickers on their bicycle, they'll ride faster. There's a good chance actually they probably will ride faster because they believe it. If someone gives you a magic potion and says, "Take this, it'll make you feel better," it'll often make you feel better. Whether it's sugar pill or whatever. And this works across the board. It's repeatable over and over and over again. We see that believing that something works will confer that advantage. Even up to the point where, with a lot of modern studies, when they're developing new drugs and things like that, what they're trying to do is make that new antidepressant or make that new pain reliever or whatever, trying to make it to beat placebo, which is actually a very high bar because the placebo effect is so effective. Now, if you flip that on its head, the nocebo effect is if you believe something negative, it becomes true. So if you believe that you're fragile, you're going to be more fragile. If you believe that something is bad for you, that something is going to hurt you, it's going to hurt you. If you believe something is dangerous, if you believe that movement is bad for you, all these things, so all these sort of negative narratives, they can have deleterious effects. And what we see a lot in the client practitioner relationship is it's very easy to slide into these sort of nocebo relationships, via power dynamics, via loss of agency, via negative narratives or just unuseful models. So classically, if people believe their backs are fragile and that they're always at danger of rupturing a disc, and then they hurt their back and they think they've ruptured their disc, they could be working with a practitioner who says, "Oh, you should never move again. Your back is fragile." And then you'll probably spend the rest of your life with a fragile back. Whereas if you kind of have more of a growth mindset, or you believe that you can have positive stimulus and your body can adapt and build up tissue tolerance over time, you can actually build up a really resilient and robust back, even if you do have a history of injuries. So the paper we always
There's
look at, go ahead.
I was going to say there's a good bit in the Tom Morrison podcast where he talks about getting his MRI back, and it shows all of his I can't remember how many times he ruptured his disc.
Yeah,
He was saying
various
how
injuries.
terrifying it is to have the in front of you looking at your back that has lots of ruptured discs in it, and actually it's just sort of more terrifying, and it kind of implies that you should be able to do a lot less than he can now do because he spent a very long time strengthening and keeping his back mobile. But it's just that kind of initially that thing of when he was right back at the beginning of having ruptured a disc. I mean, you can tell me if I'm telling this story wrong. I have to go back and listen to that episode. I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, no, that's right. And it's something you hear a lot. It's something that Peter O'Sullivan talks about a lot. And I think if we when we talk about pain on our next podcast, we can go into it. But people think there's a one-to-one relationship between mechanical injury and pain and disability, and that's not always true. What we see is people can get scans of their back and they could feel terrible pain and not seem to have any mechanical or structural issues with their back. On the other hand, you can have people who have no chronic pain at all, and if you look at their back through a scan, it would look like they should be in terrible pain all the time. And it's because pain is complex, and it's about this relationship, between your body, your beliefs, movement, even cultural beliefs about pain and resiliency. So a lot of times people will just live perfectly normal lives, and then they'll get a scan, and the doctor will say, "Oh, you shouldn't do this anymore because you've got a bad back." And I'm like, "Oh, I didn't know I had a bad back till you told me." And that's kind of a little bit what that paper talks about. So it's this paper we have. It's called Avoiding. Well, we don't have it, but I talk about it all the time. It's called Avoiding Nocebo and Other Undesirable Effects in Chiropractic, Osteopathy, and Physiotherapy: An Invitation to Reflect. And that's by Hohen Schurz Schmidt et al. And what that one does is they look at the relationships between patients and various practitioners. And I like this one because it's not picking on anybody. They look at chiropractors, they look at osteopaths, they look at physiotherapists. And what they say is you need to watch out because it's very easy to fall into this relationship as a client where you look towards the practitioner to kind of be your savior. And we see all the time that you can develop this sort of almost this dependency where you think, I need to go to this chiropractor every week to fix my back, and without them, I can't do it. And really, I think what the more modern thinking is here is you want to find a practitioner that you can build up a sort of relationship between, where you can talk about your body, you can talk about your long-term goals, and how you would like to try to build up strength or resiliency or reduce pain or whatever. And it's going to be a conversation between the both of you rather than falling into that sort of guru power dynamic where you have this person who just comes and they lay their hands on you and they fix you and you're totally helpless on your own, which I think is a very easy pattern to fall into.
I think there's something as well, and I like that it doesn't pick on sort of chiropractors and maybe praise physios. This is not to say that you should stop going to your chiropractor or physio if you like them. That's fine. But I think it is interesting, that power dynamic. Just thinking about our own personal experience or your own personal experience quite recently with a physio. We don't need to go into the details, but it was alarming because they didn't listen to you at all and just made a bunch of assumptions about you as a man in your 40s and what it probably was, and then finished up with a recommendation where I think she said, have you tried strength training? Which is really the greatest punchline, as somebody who obviously has not been listening to you at all for the last 45 minutes. But let's talk about power dynamics, because I have a good story on that too.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can flesh out mine, and I think I know which one you're going to tell as well, which is interesting. Yeah, it's funny. When I hurt my back last year, I had a pretty good hypothesis for what it was, but I just wanted to go in and see a professional, so I wanted to see a private physio. And, in their defense, I guess, it's someone who'd only been out of school for a few months. But I went in and I was sort of talking about my experience and what it was, and they weren't paying attention at all. And I said, okay, well, let me adjust your back, which is something I didn't want. I don't go to a physio for manual adjustment. So they started to give me a massage without asking, where it hurt. They didn't even realize that, because I had just had the injury a few days ago, I couldn't even get up on the table. So it took me like 10 minutes to get on the table. Like, why are you taking so long? And then they started to try to adjust my back, and I said, look, I'm not comfortable with this. And then they sort of got angry at me because I didn't want them to crack my back. And in the end, they just sort of angrily said, well, well, maybe not angrily, but frustratingly, they said, you should just try strength training and come back next week and I'll give you another massage. I'm like, I'm never going to go back to you again. And I actively tell people not to go to that practice because I think that what they do is not helpful, and it's also a practice where the head practitioner does have this sort of guru complex, and everyone's like, "Oh, this person's amazing. All they have to do is crack your back and fix you." And I just think that doesn't move the ball forward at all.
They have a very captive audience in that it's rural Scotland, and there's not many other physios around. When we lived in the south, we had a phenomenal physio in Reading. Big shout out to Go Perform Physio, who were a sports physio, and they were amazing and just very open-minded and listened. And if you're anywhere near the Reading area, take time to go to see those guys. They didn't sponsor this podcast. But I often think about talking to my parents and my dad, who definitely will not listen to this episode of the podcast, so that's fine. But he is a firm believer. He, I think, almost quote unquote was, I love chiropractors because they actually fix my back, whereas a physio just gives me a bunch of stuff to do, which I think is really encapsulates a lot. So obviously, you go to the physio and then they give you some movements to do. And then most of us, me included, go home, maybe do them for a few days and then don't do them. And then we're surprised that nothing happens. Whereas, to my dad's mind, he can go to the chiropractor once a month and she'll actually fix it. I think his chiropractor is very nice and he likes her a lot. So I think keep doing that. But it is, there's some other stuff that he could do with working on for the long term.
Yeah, it's one of the things that chiropractors talk about a lot. In a lot of their internal papers, in trade magazines, they talk about this idea of passive active treatment balance, because I think, it's a complicated profession, chiropractors, and it's a big tent. And I've met some really excellent, talented, and thoughtful people who are chiropractors. And I've met some people that I thought were absolute snake oil salesmen, which is true, across the board. That's not unique to the practice. But I think because the remit of chiropractors are so broad and their background can be so different, that sometimes it's hard to pinpoint. But what they talk about in a lot of their internal papers and discussions in this treatment balance idea, it's the difference between telling people I'm going to fix you versus providing tools for people to work towards recovery. So giving them tools so they can help progress towards their own recovery. And the issue is sometimes is a lot of people just want to be fixed. A lot of people just want to come in and they want to say, I want you to lay your magic hands upon me and I want you to fix all my problems. And sometimes when like a physio, for example, says, well, I'm going to give you these exercises, I want you to do them X times a day. That's not interesting to people. And also, they often don't understand what the exercises are for. The exercises are very boring. They're often not contextualized in a way that make them meaningful to people. So it is a really, really tough balance to find. And I guess that's probably where we can end the conversation for today, is just kind of talk about, maybe do you have any tips or ideas for how people can find a practitioner that works for them, or how people can kind of start their journey of recovery?
I guess it's that finding that balance, isn't it, as to whether you want to be, well, in my dad's words, if you want them to just fix it, or if you want to understand what's going on and they kind of give you the skills so that you can keep doing, so that you don't have to keep going back all of the time. But maybe it's that you just have. I think from all of the very good and variously very bad people that we have interacted with throughout our adult lives, I think the lesson is to find somebody who will listen to you, because I do think that power dynamic is quite troubling, because often you end up at a physio or a chiropractor, or when you're in a state of desperation. You rarely go when you're feeling good. So you're kind of there feeling really vulnerable, quite terrified that perhaps you're never going to move again, particularly if it's back pain. It's really frightening. And then you have somebody who seems quite wise and just wants to tell you what they reckon. So trying to find somebody who will actually listen to you and the wider context of your life, because it's rarely that one thing, is it, that led to the back pain or whatever it is. And then finding coping mechanisms or ways that you can help start, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Building like resilience through your life.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly it. Just giving the tools to kind of progress towards something. The point you made about feeling vulnerable during an injury or during time of pain, I think, is really important, because going back to my bad experience with the physio, it's because I was in so much pain that I ended up there. And, I left feeling so disempowered, even though I walked in feeling pretty good. Like, I knew I'd probably feel okay in about 3 to 4 weeks. And even though I couldn't really walk, I'm like, well, I sort of know what the roadmap is. And I left and I felt so much worse. And then luckily, I found another practitioner a few days later who talked to me for 90 minutes, and we just kind of sat and talked and they listened. And the majority of the session was just them listening, and then just, them kind of giving me a few tools and saying, you're going to be okay. Just give yourself some time and you'll be okay. And I still use what they taught me. And it kind of gave me like a really positive mantra of like, this too shall pass. So I think one of the things to think about if you are going to be working with a practitioner is, think, oh, what's the long-term plan? What is my relationship with this person going to look like? Am I going to be dependent on them once a week for the rest of my life? Or is this kind of person who I can build a relationship and they can give me tools so I can kind of build up that sense of agency? So I sort of have a game plan for how I can think about building strength, building resiliency, building confidence, or building capabilities. And I think that's really the thing, is how do you start that journey of building capabilities and, just sort of feeling like you have a bit more control over yourself.
Yeah, nice. I think we'll finish this one here, and then we'll go into part 2, which is on pain and pain tolerance and living with pain and things like that, which is kind of what I wanted to get into. But we realised that actually our list of what we wanted to talk about is very long, and if we want to keep this short, then we need to stop talking.
All right. Well, thanks
Okay,
for
so
coming
I'll
on,
see
Jill.
you in part 2. Okay,
All
thanks.
right.
See you
Bye-bye.
later.